to either put in the chat or rename yourself where you are calling in from. Where are you in the world? I'm in Sussex, UK, just down the hill from Steve.
I will find you. 4 minutes from the start, by the way, if you're watching a replay and you don't want to talk about, Jane and I stalking one another.
Nothing better to do. So, how many sessions have some of you already done? Give me a count. Cool. So, any favourites yet? You can put them in the chat. Highlights or anything that you're looking forward to. It's a bit like looking at the TV guide. Oh, I want to do that. In a much, much better embodied way, of course.
I have rudely renamed both of you people, so if you would like to change what I renamed you to, that's totally fine. I just did what I wanted.
That is all good.
That's okay. I don't feel that my consent has been too violated.
Unlike what I did, this is all about consent, everyone else who's watching.
Hello. So if you want to rename yourself where you are, yeah. So hello, Shriyansha from India. Yay! What a little lovely global circle we have already. And then we'll of course have everyone on the live streaming as well. So today, what are you looking forward to in this session? Is everyone aware of what it is, or is some of you just rocking up like, yeah, I'm just happy, whatever, throw it at me? Yes, so it's being seen pose. So feel free to put in the chat, what's the first thing that comes to mind when you think of being seen, being out there? It's always interesting, that first thought. It's a bit like that, the opinion that we make of someone in the first 2 minutes? We create the opinion. It's a little scary. It can be. That's what's so good about these poses, right? It gives us something to actually practice in a safe, calibrated way, calming our nervous systems as we go along. Because there's always bound to be a pose to help you calm your nervous system. And then you can do being seen. Is anyone here so far who has not been to any of these masterclasses yet, or not familiar with EYP?
Excellent.
You're all veterans. You know it. So if you, here's a thing while we wait. Are we about to go? We've got a minute, Steve? So if you were to say in a few words, how would you describe EYP to your mates? So, no prizes for the first one. One of Mark's favourite ones is yoga, not for your hamstrings, but for your life. What have we got from Daniela?
Nice, Daniela.
Architects used for inquiry. Very nice. Very nice. Hello, Natalia. Welcome. So welcome everyone, and it's so good to see you here and to come to this next session. So if you would like to rename yourself, where you're coming in from, that would be great. And so welcome to everyone in the Zoom room, and also welcome to those on the live stream, and also those who will be watching it on the replay. And know that if you're on the live stream, we still really like to hear your comments and your questions, and they will be fed back to us. So what do we have today? So first of all, let me introduce myself. My name's Jane Dancy, and I'm an embodiment coach and a somatic yoga teacher, and I'm hosting a few of these. I'm also facilitating a few as well. We like to multitask in the EYP community. So I'm looking at my notes. First of all, here in this room, who's a coach or a yoga teacher, or who's actually come for just their own personal learning? If you want to put in the chat, it's always really useful for us to know who's here and what you might be gaining from this. And you can also put, actually, if there's something particular that you are looking to get out of this session. And this session is going to be an hour long. So this is one of the lovely things about these masterclasses. It's a whole hour long to do a really deep dive into each posture, which is the first time we've ever done this. And I know that from all of us in the community are constantly saying how amazing it is and how much we're learning from watching each other doing it. And the pose that we're doing today is taking up space, and it's about well, first of all, let me tell you about how EYP works. So we take a pose, and instead of like in a normal yoga class that we might just see how it feels in our body, what we're looking at through each pose is looking at our habits, our patterns of behavior, and then seeing how we can transfer that to everyday life. So with this one, we are going to be looking at taking up space, really useful for if you want to get a little bit more confidence about being out there. And we have Anouska Anderson running the session. So first of all, there is a rather fabulous competition, which, Steve, do you want to put the details up on that? Do you want to do that first, or do you play the video?
Yeah, so the competition there is in the chat. So if you tag someone and share the Facebook post, you can enter the prize to get $1,400 worth of yoga training. So I can play a video to give you some of that.
That's pretty cool. And we also have a pretty cool video for you to see for a little bit more about this training.
What the EYP course for coaches has to offer you is a way to shift things from getting stuck in the head and getting into the body. These very simple forms can be done in normal clothing, in any setting, anywhere, and you can then begin to look at the patterns that might be keeping your clients stuck. As a coach, I use this mostly with my clients with intimacy and relationship and communication, and as soon as I get them to move from the cerebral part of the conversation and getting them down and into their body.
See yourself as you see other people, because I have a very critical eye at the moment.
So when you sign up, there's plenty of support available to you. We have a private Facebook group that you are welcome to join. We have monthly Q&A calls, so you get a lot of ideas of how other people are using the same things.
Thanks, Steve. So now I would like to introduce the teacher that we have for this next session. We have Anouska Anderson, and a little bit about Anouska. She is a dancer and an embodied yoga principles teacher. As a long-time yogi, dancer and climber, Anouska specializes in teaching yoga for dancers and climbers, along with pre- and postnatal yoga and injury recovery and management. That is a very cool set of tools you've got going there, Anouska, and I'm going to hand over to you now.
Thanks, Jane. So yes, I did my EYP course several years ago and started life as a dancer. So obviously with that, a lot of that is about being seen. Kind of spent my whole life really being seen. Took up climbing. And again, climbing indoors, you watch other people, people watch you. Mountaineering, everyone watches each other because that's how we learn, and discovered kind of being seen is something I kind of really enjoy. So this actual particular class today, workshop, is being comfortable in the spotlight. So we're thinking about how we're seen, how we feel about being seen. I know a few people, just as we kind of came into the room, there are a couple of eek when we said, you know, what's the first thing that comes to mind with being seen. So we're using posture to kind of help change our frame of mind about how we feel about that. So kind of gaining personal insight from a postural practice and bringing it into real life, which gives us awareness and it gives us options of how we can be. So one of the things today is everything's about choice. So you don't have to do anything. You can join in as much or as little as you like. This particular posture, being seen, is actually quite exhausting. So thinking about how resourced you're feeling, say, number one is, I feel like going to bed right now, but this is just super interesting. I really want to stay and watch. To 10, I'll meet you at the top of Everest. So finding where you are on that kind of scale of energy. If you're kind of 5 or below, you might just want to listen. If you're above that, feel free to join in. One of the other things is you may want to write some stuff down, which is fine when you come across things that are like, ooh, moments. So with EYP, it's not a spiritual practice. Although you can use it to support a spiritual practice, it's definitely not a spiritual practice in itself. It's non-athletic, it's open to all. And it's practical because by actually experiencing something and questioning how it feels, how it makes you feel, you begin to understand your patterns much better. And you go, ah, that's why I do this. So thinking about a way of offering a state change. So finding that position, kind of questioning how it makes you feel, whether it's a comfortable or uncomfortable experience. And that's the other thing. If you find anything is triggering, please come out. Don't stick with it if it's triggering for you. So just kind of thinking about being seen. A lot of things come up. The first thing is, how do you actually feel about being seen? Is it something you're comfortable with? Does it depend on the situation? Because we are seen in many, many different ways. The other thing is I get quite excited. So if English is not your first language and I begin to get very, very chatty and very, very quick, pop it into any of the chats and the guys will feed back to me to slow it down. So coming back to how being seen makes you feel. Are there situations where you're more comfortable in being seen? Or are there more situations where you're just kind of, nah, I'm not so sure about that? So having a think about that, pop that into the chat. Just taking a moment to really think about what it means to you to be seen. And there's many different ways we can be seen. Obviously, I come from a dance background, so it's kind of the cheesy on stage, in your face, being seen. But actually, we're seen in many, many different ways. We're seen as friends, we're seen as parents, we're seen as teachers, we're seen as lovers, we're seen as partners. You know, there are so many roles that we are seen in, and everyone needs to be seen in some way, not necessarily on a big stage, but our life is actually dependent on us being seen in certain situations. So one of the things about that is it can be, for some people, quite overwhelming. So how is it going in the chat? Yeah, fear of being ridiculed. Yeah, some people are typically all right at being seen. Brilliant. Anything else that was coming up?
Natalia says a bit dangerous sometimes.
Yes, it can feel dangerous. Yeah, professional persona. I didn't see who put that up.
And Daniela says, when I feel I've mastered a skill, I like to be seen. Not so much on the way to mastery and practicing, which includes failing.
That is a really, really important point, actually. During the last conference that Embodiment Unlimited did, there was a huge conference last year. One of the things that I spoke about actually was kind of like embracing failure. And quite often being seen is part of that. And if you're frightened of something like that, being seen then can be something really kind of difficult. But if you're not fearful of being seen, you're more likely to be less fearful of failing. So something in dance world, obviously we train a lot, we're looked at a lot, we're totally exposed, what we wear is kind of not very much. So every detail of you is kind of looked at. And then you've got a teacher going, do it one more time. And the reason you're doing it one more time, it wasn't good enough the first time. So you begin from when you're very, very small, and as you grow up, of understanding that failure actually can help you move forwards. And at that point, that's when we're all kind of like this. Why is the teacher not looking at me to make sure that I am going further? So for people who are in kind of like dance, gymnastics and bits like that, it becomes a very natural part of life. Whereas people who are not exposed to that when they're very small, it can be quite a difficult part. But it can also be difficult for those people who have been exposed to it from they're small, because it's criticism. And criticism can be hard to kind of accept and to take. So just seeing someone's popped up, I have a background in dance, I've just missed it.
Let me finish that. I come from a background of dance, but I am not dancing outside of personal use now. That was that message.
Yeah, and that happens quite a lot with former dancers, that they still move, but they move in private, because it's still something they enjoy, but it's not something that they actually want to be exposed for or to again. And then there were some other interesting comments that came up.
So it's, I'm afraid on stage. This is Belonda from the streaming. When I teach English classes, I'm comfortable being seen, but in a social situation, it feels more vulnerable to criticism.
Yeah, that's another, really valid point, that you can be very, very confident in one area, but in another area, you find it more difficult. So one of the things with this is that if we come to like stage fright, you can be awesome in the studio, rehearsals, everything. And as soon as you step into that space, that different space, everything changes. You become nervous, you can feel your heart beating, you continually need to pee. I've watched it literally cripple other people. Luckily for me, I've never actually experienced that. I get the super hyper excitement, which is why I said if I do start speaking too quickly, tell me to slow down. But I get the super hyperness because it's a real joy for me to do that. But if you put that other person who has, the stage fright back in a studio, they're perfectly fine. So it's finding how that switches between one and the other. And once you understand why you kind of feel anxious, so it's normally because of judgment, you know, what if I make a mistake? What if I fall over? What if my costume fails? It's all of those things, which also happens in kind of like social, with social connection. So, you know, you're fine with teaching English language. That's brilliant. That's a known thing. You're absolutely focused on that. But moving into social areas, everything's unknown because you don't know how other people are going to react or how you're going to react to them. So it can be, you know, kind of quite difficult and quite paralyzing sometimes. I've watched stage fright literally stop careers. Even going through therapy, they've realized that maybe that kind of exposure for them is not what they want, but they go back and they teach. Yet they're stood in front of 30, maybe 40 people, still watching them really close up, much closer than an audience would ever be to them, but they're comfortable in that situation. So it really isn't unusual to find that there are situations that you're comfortable and uncomfortable in. So, as I've said, this can be quite an exhausting kind of pose. And it's one of the reasons why we see and hear about performers, kind of like big rock stars going, I'm burnt out, I'm exhausted, because continually being seen at that kind of level is absolutely exhausting. And quite often they don't give themselves enough time to rest, which brings me to another point. Jane, who is hosting today, will be teaching at this time tomorrow, rest pose. And to see the contrast between the two will be absolutely excellent for everyone. Also, later on this evening, I think at 10, privacy pose is also being taught. They're great links on how you can, you know, really expand yourself out to the people, but how you need that kind of quiet and private time to yourself. So as you saw then, I'm kind of alluding to the pose. Let's start moving. So you can do it seated, perfectly fine to do it seated. If your feet can touch the floor, really plant them on the floor. If not, if they're on resting plates, if you're a wheelchair user, make sure that they're nice and safe. Make sure you're planted on your chair and your brakes are on. Anyone else who wants to stand, we're just going to go into the basics of the pose. So we're going to look at the shape. So coming out.
Just to butt in, Anouska, if you don't mind, at 10 o'clock tonight, it's actually care pose.
Oh, it's care pose, that's
care
it.
Pose, but inner privacy pose was the other day, because it was me.
It was you, wasn't it? Yes.
It's a really useful one to go back to and look at in relation to
So yeah, definitely go back to that one. And care pose this evening is another one. The three of those kind of caring, resting poses are really brilliant to kind of counteract this. So definitely go back and watch Jane. She's an amazing teacher. I've experienced class with her before, so definitely go back and watch. So coming in to the pose, so taking the feet kind of wide, making sure you've got a nice stable base and just finding that groundedness in the floor. And then we're just going to take the arms out, keeping them wide, keeping the fingers spread, and really experiencing kind of like a starfish. So everything is equal. So hand to foot on each side. If you have any shoulder issues, feel free to kind of lower them if you need to. And just finding that space. So one of the things with this pose to kind of watch is that we don't start arching because we start to bring ourselves into another pose. So making sure that if you look at me side on, that you're like this, and we're not doing this, because that's going into something else. So feeling where you are. and just beginning to notice how this feels. Now you may begin to feel, oh, my arms are getting kind of tired here. You know, totally normal. But how you keep that energy up. So thinking about how that feels to continually put this kind of energy out. And then we're just going to let it go. And we're going to shake it out of the body. If you're sitting, just give the arms a good old shake. And then thinking about how that made you feel. So you've made yourself as big as you can in the space. How did that make you feel? Was it something that felt familiar or something that you were just kind of like, oh, not so sure about that? I'll give you a moment to pop bits into the chat. Familiar. I'm an effing rock star. Yes. Excited and ready to play. Perfect. Yes. Exposed and nice. In this space, it felt familiar. Brilliant. Better than I expected. Perfect. We're getting some others through. I love it. Yes, I always arch my back. Yeah, that's the point where you've reached the yes, I am being seen. And it's quite interesting because I actually started off as a very shy child. You wouldn't believe it now. But my first dance teacher, who was utterly amazing, I went to class. I did not speak to her for a month. So this small little child comes into class, doesn't speak to you for a month. But I said to her later, how did you know that I would get on a stage? Because she could pretty much pick out from that baby class of very little children who would go on a stage. Now there's something, those of you with children or have got friends with small children, have you ever walked in to your child or your friend's kids listening to music and found them doing this? Finding that joyful place. Simple. Children do it unknowingly, particularly toddlers. And it's kind of a really, really interesting thing to kind of see in kids. And it's this really joyful. And they've made themselves really big and they're really getting into it. And she said, essentially, yeah, so pure. It is. It's one of those really beautiful things. She said, I noticed when I started teaching that the children who were having this good time, might not have spoken to me, totally happy to expose themselves. And she said, you'll notice there's other children who are more like this, who make themselves very small. And she said, those children are less likely to want to go on the stage because already they're making themselves small. And it's not saying that you can change a state of a child because that's something they either enjoy or they don't. And she said it's one of those kind of baseline things that, you know, they enjoy class, but actually that kind of exposure is not for them. And it was something that was really important because for me, knowing that it was an absolute choice to go on stage, she would never force a child. And it's something that has been seen in some dance schools, and there's a lot of talk at the moment of how some of the teaching has gone, both in dance and in gymnastics. So it's really nice to know that if you can tell when a child is loving it. So that's the thing on, actually, sometimes it's always been there, but you just don't know how to tap back into that. So thinking about how it made you feel. So we've had a few people say, actually, not so bad. And, oh, better than expected. Did we have anyone who was just like, still not sure about this? We're checking lots. We've got different feeds coming in.
There's a lot of people who are quite excited.
I'm liking that. Oh, so I've got a not familiar coming up, not familiar for me. So it's one of those things that you even if it's not familiar, did it feel comfortable? So the people who said it was not familiar, did it feel comfortable, or did it feel too open?
Familiar, but feels I push it, not natural and not comfortable, from Daniela.
Yeah, and that's something that once you understand that, so that I know that there are certain situations that my cat wants to take space. You can hear him in the background. I might have to let him in, otherwise he might not shut up. He likes to take space. Anyone who's done workshops with me will have seen the cat because he does join in. So going back to that kind of feeling like you're pushing it and like you're faking it, is finding that point where you're comfortable. So something for people who coach is kind of getting the people that you work with, first of all, getting them to find this place. So once they've found it, and they can find it, you know, in many different ways. We took it with the arms up. You can stretch out and expand. There are many ways of getting into it, but once they can find it, is kind of saying to them, do it with a mirror. You're not ready to be exposed to lots of people. And this is the great thing about EYP. It's something that you can do in stages. There's not a, you just do this and everything will be fixed. There are ways of going deeper and working with it in different ways. So just doing it in a mirror, just seeing yourself in a mirror and having that reflection back of yourself and realizing actually you're perfectly fine. It's not a scary thing, but it takes time. It's not something that's going to righten itself overnight. So, you know, as a coach, you may be saying to someone, actually do this for a few weeks. I know that vulnerability pose for me is you know, it's not something I'm comfortable with. It took me months. And, you know, this is being really, really honest. It took me months to get used to that. But having come from an industry and then going into climbing and things like that, vulnerability is not something that is a familiar thing because it's not something that any of us want to show. So I understand that, you know, some people are going to be more comfortable with different things. And, you know, for me, it took months. I'm not going to lie. Mark said, go and do it. Have it as a regular practice, pop it in your practice, which I did. And I found that really, really useful. First couple of weeks, I was kind of like, this is making me angry. But I treat myself to the posture that I really love. So I get to this, I do this, do the posture I'm not so keen on, and then go back to my favorite posture. And it was something that really kind of, I knew that there was something good going to happen afterwards. So you can break it up. So if somebody is really uncomfortable with something, you take it in small stages, but you have that, here's this other posture that you really enjoy, you know, to do that. Yeah, I love that. So treating yourself, yeah, it's definitely a treat. And it then also stops becoming kind of like a block. So you have that physical block. So I knew that if I got into vulnerability pose, I'd be very tense, but I knew that once I got into this, I could relax. So then I understood that finding that relaxed state in that other pose was kind of my goal. So it really reinforces what you're kind of looking for as well. And with coaching, there's also kind of like, there's different things. So if you think about, if we come back into the pose, so either sitting or standing, expanding out. So finding that place. Okay, so from here, we're just going to take the arms down. So thinking about how the shoulders and the arms felt here with the arms down. Shoulders are still nice and open. Now bringing the feet together. You're still kind of rocking that. Nothing's changed physically. I can still feel how the shoulders feel, how the feet felt, how I felt grounded in doing that. So it becomes smaller because obviously you're going into an interview where you're about getting on stage, no one's going to look at you doing this. Going into an interview and standing there like this with a big smile on your face going, loving this, is probably, depending on what you're doing, probably not going to get you the job. But finding this in something smaller, so finding that experience of how this feels in the body and then bringing it to something smaller, so you still have that. So it may look like taking a stand pose, but actually you're still embodying the idea of being out here. So bringing it in, bringing it smaller, even down to, a lot of people are doing interviews online. So thinking about that expansion, look at where my shoulders are, look at where they still are. So you can still find that. You can do that with your fingers as you're sitting down, just to prepare you. You can do this before you switch Teams or Zoom on. Make sure that you stop doing that by the time you're kind of face to face with them, because again, probably not the best idea. But it gives you that openness and that really kind of, yeah, grounded, aligned and open. Is that Katie? It's something, yeah, opening up, smiling. If you think about rock stars, you know, I'm guessing most people have been to gigs, and that moment that you're in the audience and you're looking out and there's this amazing person that you're like, this is the best person that's ever sung ever. And all of a sudden, it's as if they're looking directly at you. And there's that moment when you actually connect. And it's finding that, because talking to people who perform on those big stages, those really, really big stages, yeah, big exhale, absolutely. Just let everything out and you can feel kind of that, and you say to them, actually, I went to your gig, you were looking right at me, and they were like, I have no idea who I was looking at. But because they've got this persona of outness, you think about people like Freddie Mercury, who's probably one of the most embodied performers we've ever kind of experienced. Watching him on stage, you know, people felt that he was directly singing to them. Didn't matter how far back in the audience you were. It was as if his embodiment absolutely captivates and captures people. So other ways, so if you've got a client who finds it very, very draining, make it a bit more exciting and a bit more upbeat. Easy. We can come from here. We can do this. We can jump. Energizing instantly. Careful on the landing. Make sure you're on a stable surface. Any of the climbers who boulder, do not do this on the mats below the bouldering walls. Unstable. Bad for your ankles. Thinking about how you can, there's many ways you can uplift it. You can do the kid thing. You can dance into it and just feel that relaxation and that fun, bringing that fun back to it. But remembering at the same time that you need to kind of close things in. How are the comments going?
We've got, I felt my heart space opening up and smiling when doing the scene.
So that's an interesting one of actually just enjoying that space and enjoying being seen. And there are times that we don't want to be seen, but we have to be seen. Because the other thing about being seen, it's not just about all of those fun things. You think about the people who have to make an entrance, you know, the police officers who have to go and knock on somebody's door to tell them something horrendous. You think about their embodiment. They're embodying the same thing, but it's not bringing them joy. But in that presence, it gives somebody reassurance as well. So there are different ways of using being seen, but also finding that groundedness, because one of the things with that is that those people, when they do that, are totally grounded. You know, speaking to kind of doctors, nurses, you know, they enter and they're quite And if any of you have met Mark, Mark is not the tallest man. He's not going to kill me for this either. One of the things he said was, who's quite small in the group? And I went, I am. And he went, oh yeah, I forgot. And because sometimes small people seem much bigger than they are. And it's quite interesting on how that occurs. Certain Hollywood actors that I've met in person, I've been like, wow, you're tiny. I can more or less look you in the eye. I've never realized they were as small as they were because of the space that they encompass and the way that they can kind of take that space up. So it's about, yeah, so that's the other thing, super tall people trying to be super small and not wanting to be seen through their tallness. So quite often it is something that smaller people are like, very, I'm here, notice me. And the very tall people are like, making themselves smaller. So it's about finding your space in space. I think one of the things when I was studying photography at school, and our photography teacher talked about positive and negative space, that when you're in space, you want to be the positive part of the space. And thinking of it that way, that you bring a positive influence in the space that you inhabit, is also quite important. And thinking about it from yoga teaching, because we've been talking about how you can use it in coaching, you know, making it smaller, really feeling it and going big and kind of going slightly into somewhere else with it. Thinking about it in yoga, you know, when you're starting sun salutations, instead of starting with the arms coming up this way, if you have the space, which I think most people have, particularly with social distancing and things like that, bringing those arms up and really, really filling the space before you start closing yourself off. So if you think about it like this, you're taking up the space, you come through this position, you come up, and then as you come down, you're coming back through it to come into something that's more private and more closed. So you get that energy coming through. So big energy to breathe in and come up, and then you have that release from it. So really counteracting the big woof and the. Do we have any questions or anything that?
I've got there's an interesting comment from Katie saying, I'm also thinking of how it can be used around social justice and needing to be seen.
Yeah. And we've seen it with the big marches. People are holding things up. You know, that's one of the things when people demonstrate, they want to be seen. They're holding their banners, they're holding their placards, they're holding everything up. It's another way of really making yourself seen, you know, and it's really amazing if you watching when they do the helicopter shots of these people and they're there and they're projecting that, see me, see this, that I want to tell people about. And being seen, it covers so many things. You know, when you're talking to your children, you know, you want to be seen. And you want to be seen in, even if it's about discipline, you want to be seen in a positive, you know, rather than that negative. They may find it negative, but you come to it in a positive way. So you begin to mix it up. So it's one of those things that's, yeah, really, really important.
Got some other questions on the actual posture.
Yeah.
Can you show us what to do with the feet and the legs? And also, do you stretch your arms or are they soft?
So arms are very definitely stretched. So think dancer and jazz hands, basically. Yeah. Get those fingers nice and spread. And literally stretch out as far as you can, really, really reaching out. So thinking about the legs, feet are turned out comfortably. I'm not sure if you can see my feet on here. Can we see my feet? Brilliant. So turned out, they don't need to be as turned out as mine because I spent years doing ballet and basically can stand flat against a wall and do this. So don't turn them out as much as this. Find your comfortable balance spot. And then if you've not seen the grounding workshop, which was with, I'm trying to think who it was with, it was earlier, Jamie. So taking a stand with Jamie. Same kind of feelings through the feet. So you want them to be really, really grounded. Thinking about the arch of the foot lifting, so the feet are nice and active, toes are spread on the floor. So you've got this really nice, strong base. And then think of everything lifting up through the front of the body. So through the shins, knees, quads. So lifting up and through. Thinking about separating between the hip and the ribs, because quite often if we think of moving just up through the front of the body, we can often kind of literally move up. So moving up until you get to the hips, thinking of making space here, and then really, really reaching out. And this is why it's kind of like an exhausting posture, because being this big and being this active, it's a really active posture. You know, you are brilliant. And you are brilliant. And this, you know, it is open and it is exposed. And then you can let it go. And if you find it kind of like, oh, that was a bit much out there, just bring it into something small. So you can come into like privacy and just kind of bring your head in. Or you can do like a care pose, but you can tuck your head in. So you begin to kind of shut everything out, because that's often what leads to burnout is, as most coaches who work in that kind of sector know, is kind of, it's not just overwork, it's kind of overexposure. It's one of the things that leads to a lot of people quitting performance industry, because they haven't had enough time to kind of like bring everything in. Have we got any other questions?
Got a comment. I think being seen can also be more problematic for women, especially because of self-image and feeling comfortable of the image projected to the world.
Yeah, that is definitely, you know, this is one definitely that in many ways comes up more for women, but actually since kind of all of the social media posts, actually this is becoming quite a big issue for men as well, in that if you don't look in a certain way or you don't wear a certain thing, that you don't fit the kind of narrative that's going on. But it's always been something that women have had to deal with throughout time. So things like, someone's just brought up transgender folks and non-binary. It's one of the things that so you can also, for yoga teachers, this has often been known as goddess pose. I teach a kind of non-gender binary class. So for me, it's horse. If you've ever ridden a horse, it's usually more parallel than this, but essentially you're still in the same place. So thinking about the language as well that we use when we come into things. So you can use horse pose and not assign anything to anyone. A posture, you know, doesn't need to be male or female. It's either energetic or restful. For me personally, when I teach, having come from a dance background, obviously my exposure to people who are transgender, non-binary is probably higher than kind of like the regular population, because a lot of people go into the arts because people are accepted. We've found in general, talking to some of my friends, and for me it's quite an interesting thing on why certain postures kind of have that have been translated into very female and male kind of names. So I like to keep things neutral when I'm teaching. And there's also the thing as well of how people perceive people who are transgender. So for me, however you present yourself to me is how I see you. So if that's how you want to present yourself to me, or you say to me, that's who I am, that's who you are to me. And I think there is still a great fear, because there's still a lot of violence towards transgender people and non-binary people. So it's still quite hard. And that's, all over the world. We have a lot of laws in the UK that protect, but it doesn't stop, is something that we have to think about as well. And also the mentality, as someone said, as women, that if you put yourself out there, that anything that happens to you is your fault for being seen. And that's quite a difficult thing as well. And I think that is something that is changing slowly. But it also means that a lot of women, there's cultural aspects to it as well, cultural, religious, and you have to take all of those things into consideration when you're teaching people as well, that actually some of it may be really, really either kind of alien or really going against how they've been brought up. So you kind of have to take all of those things into consideration, and people's past history as well.
I have another question from Daniela. Can you say a bit more about combining this posture with the 4 elements? Generally not mixing models, but here it might be interesting.
With the 4 elements, it's one of those things where you can find kind of like the fire, the fire within it, but there's also the softness, the dancing into it still has the same effect. And then you've got kind of the airy kind of, ooh, I'm here and I'm there, but you're still finding the earthiness, because with all of them, if you're off balance with this, it doesn't really have the same effect. So in some ways it always has that earthy grounding to it. But the rest of you can explore the other bits as you go in. Is that helpful? Or is there anything you wanted to add? Yeah.
Marcella, did you want to add anything to that, as you are a EYP teacher? You have done the training, haven't you?
Yeah, I did the training, and it seems like a little bit like it's a new layer. Like something I discovered within this session is that I did these poses, not just this, but every pose from a very earthy way, like correct as a core, precise, slowly grounded. And it took the joy out of it. And the next thing was like, okay, how about doing it with joy? And that's like where I notice, okay, as an earthy person, I miss the air element in a lot of things I'm doing. So how about doing it from an air with joy and with maybe a little bit of ridiculous, being ridiculous.
Yeah.
That's where this question comes from. Like how can I access the different elements? And also, does it make sense at all to combine it? Like
it, yeah, I think it's really good, because if you're not finding, so if this kind of just doesn't reach you, how do you make it more relevant to you personally? So, as I said, that kind of earthiness and correctness is like, I am here. But then sometimes you need to be a little bit more flexible. So kind of the moving into it and finding that place, but you're still keeping that kind of earthy grounding to it. You can take it off into air, but then it becomes a little bit unstable, and you've got the whoa, but then it's still got that energy. Although it's got that softness and that floatiness, it still has that. And that's something nice as well to kind of connect to when people find it a very either earthy or if they're very airy, to get them back to here, actually let them be here and then bring it down, rather than this is here, which automatically makes it uncomfortable. But actually, if you had them here, they may get the same experience, and then this is less kind of strange to them. Because I know I can be quite fiery, so I'm like, yeah, get here, enjoy it, really be with it, and kind of really like bringing it in. But that's not for everyone. But yeah, finding softness in it as well for some people, because for some people this is really, really, it's too much. But if you just maybe soften a little, not too much. Think about softness sometimes, even with everything still expanded. You can still see my hands, but I've actually softened them slightly. I still have the energy going to them, but it's not kind of that stiffness, that over energy. So yeah,
that's definitely, it's a great start for further exploration. So definitely we'll keep practicing.
Yeah, it's one of those things. And fireworks fingers, it's just like and finding that within, and having a play, because we forget that play is something, as children we learned so much from playing. And if we don't play with postures, quite often if you go to a yoga class, it is just, you must do this, you must do that, that is the position. Have a play. It's one of those things. Have a play, see how it feels soft, see how it feels strong, see how it feels if if you're in a room with other people, turning your back, if you're a coach, if someone feels very exposed, how do they feel if you're not watching them and you turn away from them? It's those kind of things that begin to build people's confidence into finding those and really actually making it their own.
Anouska, just to let you know, we're coming up towards the end, but there was a couple of, there's a little question about the gaze in it, in the pose, and also as part of your roundup of the key points, could you talk about a micro pose?
Yeah, micro poses. So first of all, with the gaze, when I was talking about you go to the gig and you think someone's looking at you, the reason why they often, it's not you they're looking at, is because the gaze is out and it's direct. So you're not kind of looking off in other directions, you're being really direct with your gaze, so looking straight forwards. And that's the really important thing. If you think about all the great performers, the really great performers, go watch some videos of Freddie Mercury, In Excess, at Wembley in '91. I particularly like that one because I was there. Watch them and watch how they look. That really direct look, that really direct focus. And it really does make people feel special and that you've connected with them. The other question was,
because we got to wrap up.
Yeah.
So I'm taking the stage off of you in a minute. But micro pose. So something that could be done and you wouldn't get stared at.
So sitting, you can't see my hands here. You can just literally do the fingers. You can do it standing. You can just stretch the fingers out. No one's going to notice that you're just stretching your fingers out. They'll just be like, stretching their fingers, probably been on their phone too much and got thumb ache. It's also good for that as well. Bringing it down, finding that feeling of the shoulders being really open and being really present. Because that is the thing with this posture is that you are really, truly present and giving. You're giving out of your eyes, you're giving out of the whole of your body, both front and back, because someone who's looking at you from behind will still see that energy going through. So yeah, thinking about that, thinking about the energy that it creates for you as well, but just bringing everything in smaller. And just doing that kind of jazz hand thing, just to remind you of where it was.
That's
But
brilliant.
definitely keep these nice and out.
That's brilliant, Anouska. I've got to wrap up it there. Thank you so much for that session. That was brilliant, and just the things that really stood out for what I could see as a sort of a different take on being seen pose was how you brought a real sense of groundedness to it, but also that joy and playfulness. And there was a lot around resourcing oneself in doing this. So for me, that made it a much more viably sustainable way of doing it. So that was brilliant. So thank you so much.
Thank you for having me.
Now, if now we have like we said at the start, we've got this great possibility to win a prize, or actually to win the training. So Steve, if you want to put that that link up again, so you can get a free spot on the EYP teacher training course. So you just have to go to the Facebook post and tag a friend, and that's all you need to do. Just to know that this method that we do with EYP, it's such a, well, see how you found it right now in this session. It has the potential to be quick and effective, and has these instant skills that you can transfer to life. And I don't know what you actually found from this session, and just to have a moment to consider that. And also, how do you think that this could be for yourself in your life, and also for your clients, whether you're a coach or if you work with groups? Just for a moment, and if you actually want to put that in the chat while I do my little roundup as well. So we've got a load of website details of the training. Steve, do you want to put up the links? So there's the different packages for the training. You can do the training just for yourself. You can do it as a coach or as a yoga teacher. And what a bargain right now. So have a good checkout of that. There's it's an amazing training. I've seen lots of online trainings, and this one is very, very thorough. And what you also get is you can join our community, which we all love being part of. It's a very inclusive community, and there's the Facebook group as well. So and that will carry on. It's not just that you do the training and that's that. You become part of this community, and we're constantly learning from each other. Checking the time. So once again, thank you so much for joining us on this hour. And coming up next is Care Pose. And that's all about developing your nurturing skills, and will be led by Erica. And that's at, Steve, is that at 10 o'clock? 10 p.m. UK time. So yeah, thank you very much. Steve, have I missed anything?
No, that's great. Yeah, if you're not sure, Erica does work with women who are too nice generally, so worth checking her stuff out on Care Pose. And see you later as well, Sensuality Pose, if you want some of that.
So thank you so much, those of you in the Zoom room, those of you on the live stream, and also those who will be watching on the replay. Thank you, and I hope to see you again in the next one.
Thank you, Jane.